Okay, and Durga, please introduce the speaker.
Okay, good afternoon. Yeah, we are just 4 people now. Yeah, okay, welcome everyone to our monthly UNR PA seminar series. My name is Dhruva Neopane and I am postdoctoral scholar at the Department of Biochemistry and Molecular Biology, and I'm also the UNR PA Operation Directors. Today, we have very exciting talk from Dr. Hanqing, and the title of the talk is Chemistry for Climate Change, Electrochemical Carbon Dioxide Reduction to Synthetic Fuel. I'd like to provide short bio about Dr. Pan. She's a postdoctoral scholar in the Department of Chemistry at UNR, and her research focused on electrochemical reduction of carbon dioxide to synthetic fuel using renewable energy resource. And Dr. Pan holds degree PhD in chemistry from New Mexico Institute of Mining and Technology, and master's from MS from California State University, Long Beach, and BS from University of California, San Diego. And she has published over 20 articles on photochemical and electrochemical conversion of carbon dioxide to fuel. And she has also completed 2 internship programs before she completed her doctorate degree, one in Air Force Research Lab and another from National Renewable Energy Lab. Without further ado, I'd like to invite Dr. Pan. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Durba, for such a kind introduction. And I'm really excited to be here today as part of our UNR postdoc seminar series to be able to share with you some of the things that I've been working on since I've arrived here at UNR. So my research is focused on solving problems related to energy conversion and efficiency using a mixture of photochemistry, electrochemistry, and nanomaterials. So before I start my talk today, I want you guys to think about fossil fuels. So perhaps this is a bit of a paradoxical slide since I'm talking about renewable energy, but I first want you guys to think about fossil fuels and how really an amazing resource it is. So I want you to think about petroleum or gasoline as an example. It's a massive worldwide resource. It's extremely abundant. It provides about 5 terawatts of power across the globe out of the 18 terawatts that we use. So it's about 1/3 of our energy consumption. And it has huge energy density. So we can drive a car 500 miles on 1 tank of gas. So I Googled this the other day. There is 501 miles from San Francisco to San Diego. So you can drive from Northern California to Southern California on 1 tank of gas. And that's pretty incredible. Or you can fly a jet halfway across the earth. And yet this can power anything from cars to trucks to shipping vessels to aircraft. And yet every time you get into a car or a bus, you're not worried about it exploding because petroleum is a chemically stable compound. And as a liquid, it's easy to transport and store. It can fit in any type, size, shape of container. And in the US, there's about 100,000 miles of gasoline pipeline. And yet it's really cheap. So last time I checked, gas in Clark County costs about $4 per gallon. So what else can you get for $4? Milk, orange juice. The milk that I like to buy is the organic half a gallon that comes in those cartons. And so those run about $5 to $6 for half a gallon. So 1 gallon of gas is cheaper than my half a gallon of organic milk. And also, have you ever thought about the convenience of petroleum? Every time you go get gas, I see people bored out of their mind. I see a lot of people circling their cars and while they're waiting for their cars to fuel, and they just could not be more bored. But have you ever timed yourself at the gas pump? How long does it take? I haven't done this myself. I'm going to try it the next time I go get gas. But one professor at Stanford has done this, and he says it takes 2.5 minutes to fill up his 15-gallon tank. Never more than 3 minutes. And so this is so convenient. So imagine you're at the airport and your phone dies and you plug in your phone. Can you even reboot your phone in 2.5 minutes? So it's super convenient. And the whole takeaway of this slide is that any future energy technology needs to be able to compete with these attributes. And since we're talking about fossil fuels, I can have the same slide for coal, I can have the same slide for natural gas, and those are fundamentally the same types of molecules. But any future energy technology really needs to be able to compete with what we have now. So with the combustion of fossil fuels, we are accelerating the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere. And so with this comes a number of economical and environmental problems that I don't need to go into too much detail about. I do have a friend who is majoring in wildlife. And so she tells me because of climate change, insects and animals are beginning to migrate to higher elevations where it's cooler. And because of that, that's causing a number of problems. A couple months ago, I was able to attend a talk by a NASA scientist, and she talked about climate tipping points. So what are these tipping points that we're seeing that the Earth is beginning to have issues with climate change? And one of these tipping points is zombie wildfires. If you have never heard of a zombie wildfire, you should Google it. It's a pretty eerie phenomenon. Basically, these are wildfires that burn sometimes underground after a wildfire has been put out. And so these fires, sometimes they seemingly come back to life. That's the term zombie wildfires. And these zombie wildfires are releasing a huge amount of CO2 into the atmosphere. And if we look at our famous Keeling curve, we are continuing to see an increase in CO2 concentrations. And I think the takeaway now is we're now above 400 ppm. We are now at the point of no return. When I was in high school, there was talks of maybe if we acted aggressively enough, we can curtail emissions and maybe do something about the high CO2 levels. But now I think we're at the point of no return. It's no longer enough to just curtail emissions. We need negative emission technologies. And people might argue, well, flooding is normal. These weather events are normal. And yes, that is true. But the rate at which these events are happening is alarming. Something that would normally take decades to happen is now happening every couple of years. And the rate that we're pumping CO2 into the atmosphere is alarming. So really, we need to do something about the CO2 that's in the atmosphere. And so we want to start thinking about replacing fossil fuels, because right now, 81% of our primary energy needs is provided by fossil fuels. So when we think about energy sustainability, the first thing we can think about is negative emissions, taking that CO2 and converting it into a value-added product. Number two is energy production. How can we think about newer ways to harvest energy? Energy storage. There's tons of research going on about batteries and capacitors and energy storage materials. And lastly, energy efficiency. So this is also a major research thrust in our lab, and it's so exciting. Unfortunately, I won't have time to talk about it today, but these are dynamic windows. So when you apply a voltage to these windows, they can switch very quickly from clear to opaque to dark back to clear within seconds. And this is using reversible metal electrode deposition. And this is so fun, but I won't have time to talk about it today. Today, I want to talk about producing renewable fuels from carbon dioxide and water with the use of electricity. And this is a viable pathway because it's renewable and it's an efficient method to produce these synthetic fuels. So our lab is focused on developing these new catalysts that can facilitate this conversion from CO2 to these synthetic fuels. And as an electrochemist, we call these electrodes. So I'll be using the two words catalysts and electrodes interchangeably. So electrochemical CO2 reduction has been around for a really long time, and it was pioneered by Horry back in the 1980s. And back then, Horry and colleagues studied electrochemical CO2 reduction on a ton of different metal electrodes. So from copper to nickel, gold, silver, tin, titanium, anything. And since then, we have discovered that copper and copper-derived electrodes are currently the state-of-the-art catalysts. But I still say, as of today, there are still no good CO2 reduction catalysts out there. Why do I say this? A couple of years ago, this really nice work came out of Tom Haramia's group from Stanford. And all they did was they took a plain old boring piece of copper foil, polished it, put it in an electrolyte, applied a voltage, bubbled some CO2 and applied a voltage, And these are the 16 different products that was made. So this was such an exciting yet frustrating piece of work, because look at all these nice products that are being generated. Ethylene is a really important chemical feedstock. Ethanol is a fuel, and propanol is a fuel, methanol is a fuel. So look at all these exciting products that are being generated, but they're all being generated simultaneously, all at the same time. So can we just pick one? And so that's the issue with selectivity. Can we steer toward one particular product without generating the others? And another metric that we use when we talk about CO2 reduction is Faradaic efficiency. And so that's how we quantify what goes in, what comes out, kind of like a percent yield. And Faradaic efficiency for a lot of these products, especially multi-carbon and oxygenated products, are still low. And so due to low Faradaic efficiencies, low selectivity, CO2 reduction is still pretty difficult to do. And I'll quickly point out, we have to look at the thermodynamics and the kinetics of this reaction. So we start here first by looking at how we can make hydrogen. So if we take 2 protons and 2 electrons, we can make hydrogen, and it does not take a lot of energy to do this. So this is at 0 volts versus reversible hydrogen electrode. It doesn't take a lot of energy, and that's why water splitting is fairly easy to do. Hydrogen evolution reaction is the cathodic reaction from water splitting. And if we look at all these reactions for the CO2 reduction reaction, generating carbon monoxide or methanol, methane, ethylene, these values are also very close to 0. Not only are they close to 0, they're really close to each other. And so what this means is that all these CO2 reduction reactions are not only competing against the hydrogen evolution reaction, they're all competing against each other. And the figure that's right here on the right is a proposed mechanism of how CO2 reduction occurs. I'm not expecting anybody to be able to read what's on this slide. It's only up here to show the complexity. CO2 reduction is a wickedly complicated reaction that requires multiple electrons and multiple protons. And so this makes, again, selectivity incredibly difficult. So I start today, when I first started here, what we wanted to do is to make a bifunctional electrocatalyst. And by bifunctional, I mean making one catalyst that is capable of catalyzing 2 different reactions. So we can do that. That's pretty convenient because we can save a lot of time, energy, and money if we can just make one catalyst that's capable of catalyzing 2 different reactions. And so most bifunctional catalysts that are currently out there is for water splitting. So for water splitting on the anode side, we're making oxygen, so oxygen evolution reaction, and on the cathode, we're generating hydrogen. Instead of hydrogen evolution reaction, we want to couple oxygen evolution reaction with our CO2 reduction reaction. And if we can couple those 2 together, we can start to think about making CO2 electrolyzers. And because there is no good CO2 reduction catalyst out there, there's very few CO2 electrolyzers that are currently being commercialized. And so the catalyst that we're making today is a thin film catalyst. So we start with carbon mesh. Basically, this is carbon paper. So just envision a piece of paper instead it's made out of carbon. And using electrodeposition, we can deposit a thin layer of copper oxide and a thin layer of nickel on top of that. And the idea is that if we can tune the thickness of nickel, we can control products. And I'll point out here that this is not an alloy. These are just layers on top of one another. And the first thing we can do is look at the electrochemical behavior of these films. So this is a linear sweep voltammetry, and we're just looking at how much current density is being generated as a function of voltage. And the 2 metrics we look at when we look at these linear sweep voltammetries is first onset potential. So where is it that our reaction is beginning to occur? So where is it that this line is increasing in slope? And also which catalyst is giving us the best or most current density? So we've looked at this reaction in 2 different gases, CO2 and nitrogen, just to confirm that CO2 reduction reaction indeed is happening. And there is definitely more current density when it's in CO2 than nitrogen. We can also arbitrarily pick any voltage and look at all the different catalysts and look at all the current densities that they're generating. And so at minus 0.6 volts, the catalyst that is generating the most current density is the catalyst with 200 seconds of nickel electrode deposition. So linear sweep voltammetry can only tell us so much. We really need to quantify our products. So let's do that. We did this reaction under two different voltages. One is at little less mild of a voltage and one at a much more harsh, much more negative voltage. Two interesting things can happen when you push a reaction that hard. One is that it could either completely shut down your reaction and we see no other products but hydrogen. Or if you push your reaction hard enough, we can start to see some interesting products like methane and ethylene. There's a lot of data going on here, but the only thing that I want to point out is that if we look at copper oxide without nickel, so copper oxide by itself prefers to generate carbon monoxide as compared to formate. But as soon as we put that nickel overlayer, the selectivity changes, it then preferentially makes formate instead of CO. So something is happening, some kind of synergistic interaction is happening between the copper and the nickel, and it's switching selectivity that there's more to dig into there. So these are always fun images to look at. We can look at our catalyst under a scanning electron microscope. And so when we zoom in, we see this spiderweb-like structure. And so this is very similar to what we see with a piece of paper, with all the cellulose of the paper. And the brighter spots that are on top is the copper oxide and nickel. And so the copper oxide and nickel is preferentially depositing along the spindles and fibers of our carbon paper. And so you might ask, well, how do you know that? This is just black, white, and gray. How can you confirm what is what? And we can take our catalyst and take a map of a small section of our catalyst and do an elemental analysis. The first element that we're seeing is fluorine. And at first, this was a bit of a surprise. Why are we seeing fluorine from carbon paper? But our carbon paper is being treated with a Teflon polymer. And Teflon is a fluorinated polymer, so we're seeing all of the fluorine. We see copper and oxygen and nickel, and they indeed are only preferentially depositing along the fibers and the spindles of our carbon paper. And the carbon paper spindles are kind of serving as nucleation sites for our catalyst to grow. And this makes sense because it's impossible to deposit in these empty spaces. So after looking at the CO2 reduction reaction, we want to look at the other side of our reaction, look at the anode, which is the oxygen evolution reaction. And actually, a couple of years ago, a student in our group used this copper oxide and nickel catalyst and tested it for oxygen evolution reaction, but she tested it on top of tin-doped indium oxide. And it worked well, but tin-doped indium oxide is unstable, especially under reductive conditions. And so I put this catalyst on top of our carbon paper to see if we can do any better, and it actually performs so much better. So we're looking at this green line here. The reaction is happening earlier than any of the other catalysts. So this is good because it's taking less energy for this reaction to happen. And the green line is generating the most current density out of the other ones that we tested. So carbon is a much more stable substrate than tin-doped indium oxide. We can also look at this reaction now bifunctionally. We can study this under CO2 and nitrogen just to confirm that CO2 reduction is happening. We can test a control, so what is carbon alone doing? And we're looking at this red line. So this red line has the earliest onset potential and the most current density. And so our catalyst is the best in CO2 compared to all the controls. And we also want to test the durability. So if we ever want to commercialize this, our catalyst has to be durable for decades. And our catalyst here is durable for 24 hours. And I think it's a good start. We're nowhere near decades, but at least 24 hours is a good start. And we're seeing that there's no change in voltage. That's a good sign. So if our voltage continuously increases, that means we're continuously needing to put more energy into the system, and that means our catalyst is dying. So with no change in voltage, this is a good sign that we have a stable catalyst. So continuing with this nickel copper idea, we did one more study. Instead of copper oxide and nickel as different layers, we are co-depositing copper and nickel simultaneously at the same time on top of our carbon paper. But instead, let's add in an extra layer of titanium nitride nanoparticles. Because in literature, titanium nitride nanoparticles has been shown to enhance the catalytic efficiency of some of these metals. So we wanted to see if that worked. So again, we're looking at current density and onset potential. And so I'll point out that our copper nickel catalyst on top of the titanium nitride on top of carbon is giving the highest catalytic efficiency, giving the most products. And I just love looking at these images. They're so fun to look at. But the top here is only nickel copper on carbon paper. And so we're seeing something that was very similar to before. We had these carbon paper spindle fibers, and the little tiny balls and clusters on top of that is our copper nickel. When we put down a bed of titanium nitride, so this picture right here reminds me of, you know how when you have mud and then it dries and it cracks? That's what it reminds me of. But the titanium nitride, when it's added, it's helping the nickel and copper deposit so much more uniformly. So now it's no longer depositing only along the spindles, but it's depositing almost everywhere. And so when you zoom in, this looks like a very meshy, spongy material, and it's just so much fun to look at. So we can also confirm what's on our catalyst with elemental analysis. So this is nickel copper only on carbon. And so they are depositing only along the spindles and fibers of the carbon, and it's ununiform. But when we put down a bed of titanium nitride, our nickel copper deposition is so much more uniform. And so this is partly why it's helping our catalytic efficiency. So again, we look at oxygen evolution reaction and the bifunctionality of this catalyst, and we're going to focus on this green line. So the green line is our copper nickel catalyst on top of titanium nitride on top of carbon. And it's giving the best performance in oxygen evolution reaction bifunctionally, and it's also the most stable out of the other catalysts that we tested. And so we've looked at now these bimetallic systems, and there's something interesting going on between them, some synergistic interaction going on between the nickel and the copper that's really helping the catalytic efficiency of our catalyst. And so now we switch gears. We know that bimetallic systems are awesome. And now we switch gears into thinking about how can we control proton and electron transfer in CO2 reduction reaction, because CO2 reduction reaction requires a lot of protons and electrons. So we want to be able to modulate and control proton and electron transfer with a proton permeable membrane. So the membrane that we want to use is Nasion. If you're familiar with Nasion, Nasion is used in fuel cells. You can also use it as a binder. You can mix it in your catalyst so that you can drop cast it uniformly. Any electrochemist will tell you Nasion is used to separate the cathode and the anode of your reaction. Since we're generating products from our cathode, we want to separate that from our anode so that the products being generated from the cathode is not getting reoxidized on the anode. So that's what Nasion is used for. It can come in an actual membrane form, like a piece of paper. It can come in a solution form. And so what we're doing is using it in solution form. Instead of mixing it into our catalyst, we want to just put it on top of our catalyst. And this is such a simple idea, yet no one's ever done it before. And we're getting some really exciting results from just a Nasion overlayer on top of a metal electrode. So we can confirm this by looking at our sample under an electron microscope. Instead of looking at it from a top-down view from before, we can look at it from the side, which is a cross-sectional view. And so elemental composition analysis is helping us to verify this really thick piece here is our copper metal substrate. And on top of that is our Nasion membrane overlayer. And this is really helpful because it helps us keep track of how thick our Nasion is. So we need to be able to figure out what is the optimal thickness to do our experiments. If we go way too thick, nothing can diffuse through it, electrons are impeded, and it will shut down our reaction. And this is demonstrated here by impedance spectroscopy. The bigger the semicircle is, the more impeded the electrons are. And so if we go too thick, maybe 100, 200 microns, then it begins to impede electrons, protons, and CO2 will no longer be able to diffuse through. So we need to control our thickness of our Nasion. Couple of the experiments that we did here. First thing we did is switch up our substrate. We want to know, does the metal underneath even make a difference? So we changed it up. We tried copper, we tried nickel, we tried carbon paper. And product is changing. Faradaic efficiencies here is changing. So the metal that's underneath absolutely makes a difference. We also wanted to test our polymer overlayer. Let's go to the extremes. Let's take an extremely hydrophobic polymer and let's put that on top of our metal and see what happens. And so we use this other fluorinated polymer called PVDF. And when we put down a thick layer of PVDF, it's completely shutting down our reaction because we're not seeing any products here, barely at all. Of course, we need to figure out what is our best optimal Nasion thickness. And so you can see that too thick will shut down our reaction. So anything thicker than 40 microns is too much. All of our experiments are voltage dependent. And so depending on the voltage, that changes up our products. And so the thing I want to point out here is this data point right here at minus 0.4 volts versus RHE, we're making 88% methane. So that's high, super high selectivity. And I'm very excited to say today that as of today, looking into literature, 88% CO2 conversion to methane is the highest that's ever been reported. And so this was such an exciting piece of result for us to publish. So I guess I broke a world record, making 88% methane. So this is incredibly awesome. So these set of experiments really helped us answer the question of where is our CO2 reduction occurring? So let's think about a couple scenarios. The first thing that could happen if we have a really, really thick Nasion overlayer, 100 microns, 200 microns, nothing can diffuse through. CO2 cannot diffuse through. The only thing that could happen is protons from the electrolyte and electrons from our metal surface combine and make hydrogen gas. And this is exactly what we're seeing experimentally. With a really thick Nasion overlayer, the only product we're seeing is hydrogen. And so the reaction is happening up here on top. At the polymer is represented by these blue squiggly lines. Polymer electrolyte, so electrolyte is our solution. Polymer electrolyte interface up here on top. If we have a thin enough Nasion overlayer, everything can diffuse through. So our CO2 is easily diffusing through that thin layer of Nasion, and it's getting reduced on the electrode surface, generating products. And at the same time, we're also seeing hydrogen being generated. And now the reaction is happening down here at the electrode polymer interface, so right here. Our third scenario is, what if we have a non-uniform Nasion overlayer? What if I didn't, drop cast correctly and the Nasion has holes? If the Nasion has holes, our electrode is being directly exposed to our electrolyte. And so CO2 is coming in, bypassing the Nasion. So it's just going through these holes, getting reduced on the electrode surface, generating products. We're also seeing hydrogen. And now the reaction is happening kind of in the middle here at the electrolyte interface. But we know from our electron microscope experiments that this is not the case because our Nasion overlayer is very uniform. So there are no holes in our Nasion overlayer. So why is this happening? Why are we able to make such high yields of methane? The hypothesis that we have is that the Nasion somehow is stabilizing the CO intermediate. What do I mean by that? So when we do CO2 reduction reactions, one intermediate that happens is a CO intermediate in either one of these two configurations. At this stage, CO can pop off and we can detect CO as a product. So that's one thing that could happen. But if the CO intermediate remains on our electrode surface, it can continue to take on some electrons and protons to protonate and make methane. What we're thinking is happening is that somehow the Nasion overlayer is helping stabilize the CO intermediate, helping it remain on the metal surface so it can further undergo reduction. It can be further protonated to generate methane. That's what we think is happening. And so this project really opened up the door for really exciting other projects. So there are so many things now we can think of. We can change up the polymer, we can change up the substrate. There is so many more things that we could do. So I talked about how we put down if we put down a really thick layer of PVDF polymer, it shuts down our reaction. But can we somehow make a blend of PVDF and Nasion, and can we control products that way? We've demonstrated before that these mixed metals work really well. Could we do the same here? So the first couple of mixed metals that I can think of is brass, bronze. Can we change that up as our substrate to control selectivity? Another thing we can do is control the hydrophobicity. Why is that important in CO2 reduction? So only a couple of years ago, this study was published, and they talked about these aquatic diving spiders. And these spiders can dive so well, and they also have these hydrophobic, tiny hydrophobic hairs on their abdomen. And what that helps them do is it helps them trap gas. If we apply this to CO2 reduction reaction, if we have a very hydrophobic electrode surface, that can also help us trap CO2 gas. And if we can increase the local concentration of CO2 at the electrode surface, we can then perhaps control selectivity. And so hydrophobicity has been proposed as a governing factor in CO2 reduction selectivity. One last thing we could do, we know that CO2 reduction reaction requires protons and electrons. And so we're doing our reaction in water, essentially. There's lots of protons there. But what if we can control proton availability? We've been able to control proton transfer rates with the Nasion membrane, the amount of shuttling of protons, but can we control proton availability? If we take away some of the proton concentration, instead of protonating that CO intermediate to generate methane, can we push these CO intermediates towards each other? So can they couple with each other to make multiple carbon products? So this was really exciting for us. We were able to do this as well. So first thing we did, we can change up the hydrophobicity of our electrode. And we're doing this by mixing PVDF polymer into our Nasion polymer. And keep in mind, PVDF is extremely hydrophobic. So the more PVDF we add, the more hydrophobic we can make our electrode surface. And this is demonstrated here by contact angle measurements. So if you drop a water droplet onto a surface, if the surface is hydrophilic, if the water droplet likes the surface, it will spread out like figure A. But if our surface is really hydrophobic, the water droplet speeds up. And so we can demonstrate here by adding more and more amounts of PVDF into Nasion, we're making our copper or metal surface really hydrophobic. And what happened when we made our electrode really hydrophobic? Well, we're able to generate very high amounts of formate. And formate is an interesting product, an important one, because there's a lot of things you can do with formate. There's formate. Formate is a hydrogen storage material. I think it's used in fuel cells, and it's a really good product to be generating. But really high hydrophobic surface is helping us generate high formate. And if you're curious why a hydrophobic surface helps to generate formate, I'm happy to explain that later on. But we have to be careful with how much PVDF we're putting into our Nasion. 52% weight percent seems to be the optimal PVDF loading, because too much PVDF will shut down our reaction, as we've seen before, because that's going to cause mass transport problems. Nothing's going to be able to diffuse through. CO2 is not going to be able to diffuse through, because CO2 is a lot less permeable in PVDF than it is Nasion. And so this is our optimal PVDF loading is 52%. And so we can also decrease proton availability. So I'll quickly talk about here, if we can, so we're normally doing our reactions in water with lots of protons, but we can change that up by adding in a aprotic solvent, acetonitrile. And so now we have a lot less protons to work with. Look at what's happening here. We're making ethylene, C2H4. We're making ethanol. We're making propanol. So this set of experiments is confirming our hypothesis that by decreasing proton availability, we're no longer protonating that CO intermediate to make high amounts of methane. We're instead pushing those CO intermediates towards each other for them to dimerize, trimerize to make these multiple carbon products. So we can add up all of our carbon containing products, excluding hydrogen, and we hope that it can add up to 100. We're able to achieve that with a copper electrode modified with Nasion. And so excluding hydrogen, we can generate all carbon containing products. And so the idea here is that hydrogen evolution reaction does not occur under properly controlled conditions. And it's nothing against hydrogen. Hydrogen is a great fuel, but for us, our focus is not quite on hydrogen. It's more on these multi-carbon oxygenated products. One more thing I'm going to say before I finish up is brass. We've seen some interesting results with brass. So brass is a mixture of copper and zinc. And what is interesting here is we're seeing high amounts of ethylene. Ethylene is a really important chemical feedstock. And this is super exciting for us because this electrode is made from brass, and then on top of that, PVDF mixed into Nasion. This is interesting because copper PVDF does not do this. Zinc PVDF does not do this. But copper and zinc together as brass with PVDF makes high amounts of ethylene. So again, there's some kind of special interactions going on between the copper and zinc that's necessary here for us to achieve this high ethylene yield. So we can summarize everything into a mechanism, and I won't go into detail about this today, but the idea is that I'm able to generate these 6 different products with over 50% selectivity. So again, under properly controlled conditions, so we can control hydrophobicity, we can control our solvent, we can control the metal, we can control the polymer, we can control the thickness of the polymer. And so under these properly controlled conditions, we can control product selectivity. And so with that, I'm going to finish up. We've looked at some bimetallic systems that are these bifunctional catalysts capable of catalyzing both CO2 reduction and oxygen evolution reaction, and they are pretty durable. I was able to demonstrate controlling proton and electron transfer rates with Nasion. We can also make these copolymer blends, and we can dictate 1 versus 2 versus 3 carbon products. And so moving forward, we can combine photochemistry and electrochemistry together, which is going to be very exciting because my PhD was in photochemistry. And now combining that with electrochemistry, we can hope to continue to control product selectivity. We can look at tandem catalysis, so having 2 or 3 different types of catalysts all put together. That can also help control product selectivity. And so I'm going to finish up by saying that I think renewable fuels are absolutely promising, and this is a very exciting area for me to be in. And so with that, I like to acknowledge my PI, Dr. Christopher Barilli, and everybody in the Barilli Lab, undergraduate students and graduate students. Joel from the McKay Microbeam Laboratory that's helping us with our electron microscope experiments, the UNR Shared Instrument Laboratory, all of our collaborators and funding sources. Thank you so much for being here today, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Penn, for such an exciting presentation. If anyone has any question.
Yes, I do, please.